Welcome to Tradewind's webinar on teaching in Victoria, specifically in Melbourne, moving over from New Zealand. My name's Ian McNally, and with me is Rebecca Arthur and Billy Green.
Hello.
Nice to see you all.
Now, my name's Ian, and I am the Education and Learning Specialist at Tradewind. Of course, this webinar is designed to tell you how brilliant everything will be in Melbourne. Come over and teach. It is the best. Of course, we've made the move. We all live here. And also, Tradewind would be very happy for you to be teaching in Melbourne. But I want to get underneath that a bit. What is it really like to move countries, to teach in a different system? Is it like the reality day to day? Because it is a big move. Bex, you've helped lots of people move countries in your previous role, and you've also moved countries in your time. You're a trained teacher as well. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience moving yourself and also helping people to move?
Yeah, sure thing. So I moved over to Melbourne in 2017 after living in London for 7 years, and initially moved from New Zealand across to London with nothing more than sort of the one suitcase, and then arrived in Melbourne with about 17 boxes. But the move itself, the transition was very, very easy. I would certainly say that Melbourne is much more on a, similar cultural plane as New Zealand in terms of its diversity, getting around. Public transport here is so much more advanced. I would definitely put the public transport here in Melbourne in line or very, very similar to the great guns of London. It's very easy to get around. Melbourne City, I think that CBD is fantastic. So if those of you Kiwis, if you're familiar with Wellington, I often think of Melbourne CBD as being just a little bit bigger than Wellington. So everything's really nice and central. It's very easy to get into the CBD and also get out into the suburbs from lots of lovely central train stations as well. So I found the transition personally, moving to Melbourne, was much easier. Obviously, it's a lot closer to home. And I specifically, my favourite thing about living in Melbourne is that it's actually quicker for me to get home to New Zealand than it is to fly to Perth. So in that sense, it feels like you're still very, very nice and close to home. And I didn't find it difficult setting up a bank account here because I personally banked with a bank that is also based in New Zealand, so that was very straightforward for me. Of course, there's other banks available too. Setting up a Medicare, which is your health and medical record, is pretty straightforward, and getting a tax file number, also very, very straightforward. So all things I believe we can help with too with that transition as well. So certainly an easy move for me.
Bex, just on one of the questions, which would, and I don't imagine that you would have too many people coming over from New Zealand in my vintage, but nonetheless, their parents would be asking this question. Where are you going to live? How hard is it to find accommodation and decent accommodation and determine, suburbs that you would need to pop yourself in, particularly if you're coming over to either work or work as a casual relief teacher? How hard is it to locate yourself in something that's a decent suburb, find a decent house and still have access to good work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's a really good question in terms of where you want to be basing yourself. Tradewind, we have schools that are based all across Melbourne, and I think it's probably worth reaching out to one of our consultants to find out specifically what it is that you're looking for in terms of areas and what you're looking for in a suburb, in a place that you're going to live. So, for example, when I came straight from London, it was really important to me that I was living close enough to get into the CBD and still have really good transport links to get around the place. And we settled in North Melbourne, and that was more so because I had a lot of friends that lived up this way. I know that the south of Melbourne is also very, very popular because you're close to beaches, you're close to the Mornington Peninsula. There's plenty of good shopping down that area as well. And I think it's really dependent on what you're looking for from an area to get the most out of it. And that's not to say that, I mean, you could live a bit further out in the suburbs or further out than that, and it could be a bit cheaper in terms of the rent, but then you've got to sort of factor that in with your travel costs of getting in and out, and how close you are to schools as well. But I think generally speaking, the majority of our schools are probably easier to get to via car, but of course it's also doable via public transport. It just may take a little bit longer depending on traffic, but then of course with cars you've got the traffic as well. It just depends on where you land, really.
And Billy, in terms of if I'm living in New Zealand, I've been teaching in New Zealand, making that shift into a completely different education setting, different network, potentially different curriculum, Australian teaching standards going to differ. What is it like teaching in the Melbourne school system?
Look, I think one of the best things, and it has developed over at least a couple of decades, so it's pretty well documented now, and I literally mean documented, but there's a lot of really good material when you move into Victoria around curriculum, about what the teaching standards are and what's expected from you in schools. You could stay in New Zealand and have a look at, you just on the website, for example, the Victorian Education Department website, if you just Google that, there would be more than enough information there and more than enough links there to put you in a position where you would have a fairly good grasp of what's expected. Tradewind, of course, would be able to help you out. Even people like myself who worked as co-principals and assistant principals and now work as mentor and professional development with Tradewind, you could easily have a chat to us. But just by going onto the website, and this is what I mean by well documented, many years ago, there was probably a lack of really solid information. But what you would find on the website in Victoria now is not only really useful and really helpful in terms of what you would do yourself, it's actually what happens. So I think that's one of the most important things to understand. You go into a lot of websites, you read up on the documents there, you get out to the school and realize that no one in the school's ever seen them, and you think, oh, that's funny, it's on your website. But in Victoria, that's not the case. What you will read on the Victorian Education Department website is actually what's happening. So in terms of the curriculum, it's a funny sort of setup in a way. We've got an Australian-wide curriculum, but then like a Victorian sort of version of it, and all states have that themselves. But what's the schools teach from that curriculum. So you would get a good idea of what's expected of you. We've got standards. Victorian Institute of Teaching has their own standards, but you'll also get referred to the AITSL standards. You would read those, and as a teacher, you would be able to adjust and certainly make links between what you currently do and your work in schools in New Zealand. So, and even in fact, the sort of guru, if you like, of Victorian education, a guy called John Hattie, he's actually a New Zealander anyway. So so in terms of just getting your head around what's expected generally, then you're not going to have any trouble with that. You'll get a good understanding by just having a look at Victorian education website. And then you would probably, and then that's without even talking about individual schools, but you would probably agree with that. It's pretty transparent, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I made the move from teaching in the UK to coming into the Victorian school system, and I found it to be very impressively resourced, particularly online, and the Department of Education here has made big inroads in the last 3 years in terms of how to navigate the website, the information. The child safety has really improved over the last 3 or 4 years. I think also the public school building program as well, you can see that schools have physically improved in terms of classrooms, flexible spaces, breakout rooms. So if you're a modern-minded teacher, I think it's a really good place. But Bex, why should people, if I'm nice and comfortable in a comfortable job in New Zealand, why should I make the move? Is it going to be detrimental to my career? Is it going to benefit it? What have you seen in your experience with teachers you've worked with?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, Kiwis are often known as being ones who are keen on doing their OE. And I mean, whether that's still the case or not, it certainly was back when I started teaching. You do a couple of years teaching and then you either fly over to London or come to Australia and get some experience. And that's the main point there, is that it's experience that you wouldn't get at home. It's opportunities that you wouldn't necessarily get at home. It's working in different types of schools, potentially larger schools with different settings, different cohorts of students, different cultural representations that can really provide you with that really fantastic personal development that you might not necessarily pick up staying in New Zealand. And I think it's just, you know, being able to get out of what maybe you're used to and getting out and seeing a different perspective, whether that's in Australia or teaching overseas somewhere else, or and just in as many different environments as possible, is really at the end of the day going to make you a better teacher, because you've had those added experiences.
And Billy, if I'm coming over for relief teaching work, it seems that there's a lot of it about. How important are relief teachers to the school system in Melbourne?
They've always been really crucial. And one of the jobs that I do with Tradewind is to do professional development work with relief teachers. And I always start every one of those professional development classes by talking about just how important relief teachers are to schools. You can't run schools without relief teachers, and schools are absolutely desperate, leaving aside the numbers now, but they're absolutely desperate to have really high quality relief teachers in there, because there's a real emphasis in Victorian education now around the consistency of delivery. So the old days, and I can talk authoritatively about the old days because I knew them. The old days relief teachers were really just simply about, without, I don't want to be too derogatory, but it was a little bit of babysitting. Most schools are happy just to get someone in there, and as long as things went okay for the day, that was fine. A lot of relief teachers would come along with their own programs and just run things as they saw fit and as suited themselves. That's definitely not the case now. Schools, when they have relief teachers, there's a high expectation that those relief teachers are professionals in themselves, in the sense that they will be able to come in, pick up the program where it is, and more or less make within limits, of course, a seamless transition from the teacher day to day and just keep the program going, because schools don't want their programs interrupted. There's a lot of work. There's a whole range of different sorts of work that you could do as a CRT in schools in Melbourne particularly, but right across the state now. The demands have never been higher. That obviously for a lot of reasons, but not the least of them is in all schools now, every teacher is entitled to 4 days a year professional development leave. And those teachers have to be covered. They quite often go out in teams, and therefore the schools will need CRTs in to replace them and to keep that whole team running. So that's one of the ways you could work in a lot of individual sort of days. The other way is there's quite a lot of time where you'll pick up work that might run for at least a week or two, or you could even pick up work that runs for a term, where someone might be either seconded somewhere else or they might be on long service leave. So there's a whole range of ways that you can fit into the system as a relief teacher. And there's even the opportunity these days and there is a shortage here, there's no doubt about that. If you happen to be in the right, say for example, maths and science in a secondary area, you could easily be here for say term 1 next year, and by term 2 have picked yourself up a role that will carry you through to the end of the year. So the demand's high. You've got a range of opportunities. You might say, well, look, I only really want to go there for part experience, part holiday. I just want to work 3 days a week and spend some time exploring Melbourne. You could do that for sure. There's a whole range of options. And as I said, you are treated with, I think, a lot more seriousness, if you like. It's a much more professional job. You'd be welcomed in by the school. You'd become a part of the team. You'd be working with colleagues who would expect you to do, as I said, to continue the program as is. So there's a lot more, I guess, professional enjoyment that you would derive from the roles now, comparing to what it might have been like, say, 20 or 30 years ago. So even 10 years ago. So I think there's, just depending on what you want, you could probably find your niche here in Melbourne, no doubt about it.
And Bex, in terms of if I'm ready to make that move, ready to come over to Melbourne to give it a go, certainly we can help at Tradewind in terms of finding work and pretty guaranteed work as relief teaching for the time that you'll be in Melbourne. But there's things that I need to do. Do I need to sign up regulatory? The Victorian Institute of Teaching. What's my next move in terms of getting my ducks in a row so that I can move over?
Yes, so you will need to register with the Victorian Institute of Technology and
teaching.
I recommend teaching. Sorry.
You can register with the technology guys as well, I'm sure.
Very helpful.
Yes, so you will need to register with the Victorian Institute of Teaching, and generally that's providing them with your registration back home in New Zealand so that they can check against the records back home, and fairly straightforward process. It's really just a matter of going onto their website and registering there, which you can do before you come over. And certainly I would recommend getting in touch with one of our consultants to have a chat through your plans, and then we will be more than happy to talk you through anything else that we can help you with in terms of setting up shop over here, particular areas that you might be interested to live in, and areas where you might find there might be a slightly more type of work for your particular specialist method, or primary, secondary, or if you wanted a balance of both. And we'll be here to support you through that move over as much as we can and answer any questions that you have got.
Yeah, and certainly start looking, main real estate websites and things like that will give you a guide to how much perhaps you're going to pay per week for a property. But the other thing is the room share is potential house sharing is a lot of people do that for the first period of time, and also maybe living in different areas. The CBD, South Bank are good locations for public transport, but also places like Footscray give great access to our schools in the West. And I think Footscray was voted one of the top 20 coolest places to live in the world. It's lots of exciting discoveries to be made in the suburbs of Melbourne, most certainly. But Billy, in terms of getting that permanent role, or Bex, is there any visa requirements, or what's the situation if I'm a bit nervous about how long I can stay in Australia? It's all okay, isn't it?
If you're a New Zealand citizen, you're coming over to Australia, you'll be on a special category visa. So you can just come into Australia and you'll get a little card when you go to the airport, and that's pretty much it, really. It is a visa that is attached to your passport, but you won't get a physical copy of that. It's just every time you tap into Australia or you go back home to New Zealand and then you come back to Australia, it would just restart again.
Yeah, I think the other thing, Ian, that we probably should point out, and as long as they don't show this video to anyone else but New Zealanders or perhaps Canadians, but New Zealanders and Canadians have got a very good reputation in Australian education. That's not to say other countries don't, but they do. And so your chances of, as I said, if you were here working early 2022, and you were doing some daily work and then perhaps extended to a week's work, there's a very good chance you could find yourself, depending on your method, but there's a very good chance you could find yourself with a permanent role. Now, you might, as I said before, you may not want to do that. You may want to spend some time traveling, but there's a lot of work in Australia at the moment, and in all schools, there is a demand for really high quality teaching staff. So, and that's in the government sector, which is the majority of the sector here in Victoria, but also in the private sector. And if you're not aware of those two sectors, the private sector tends to be, the biggest part of the private sector is the Catholic Education Office, which you would contact as well. They have the most in the private sector, but then a lot of the other schools are denominational, but not to the point that you need to be practicing in that faith. And then there's a lot of other schools that are, I suppose, less denominational, non-denominational private schools as well. So there's a whole range of ways that you could approach education here. So whether it be through a private sort of system or through the government system, and you don't need to come up with any special, I guess, documentation or anything. Once you've registered with the VIT in Victoria, you are entitled to work in, or you're able to work in all of those schools.
Yeah, absolutely. And the pay as well might be slightly better than in New Zealand for teachers. I know we're probably average for a relief teacher, it might be around 350 Australian dollars per day. On average, in the government sector, a teacher's salary, I checked it this morning, was $98,000 on average. Which is just over 100,000 New Zealand, which I believe is a significantly more generous salary than back home for you, Bex. But there's obviously other reasons to live in Melbourne, given the amount of what that is on the sports calendar, the day-to-day, the lifestyle. What is it about Melbourne that you really enjoy, Bex?
Oh, I'm a huge foodie, so I'm really into the restaurants, and they are some of the best restaurants I think I've eaten across the world. And safe to say, some of my favourite restaurants of all of that pool are here in Melbourne, which I just feel we're so lucky with. The other big thing is international acts that come to Melbourne. Much more so than what you would be seeing on the New Zealand stages, and same with musical theatre. Comedy, the Melbourne Comedy Festival is amazing here every year, really good value there. Lots of fantastic festivals, whether it's beer or arts and crafts or music festivals. They're all over the place, and so much fun. So much fun. There's always lots of lovely little things to find that you haven't seen before in Melbourne. That's one of my favourite things about the city, is you could be walking up a street and see something that you've never seen before.
Yeah, I think the other thing that and I think you're right, Bex, too. I live in regional Victoria now, not that far out of Melbourne. And again, you mentioned before public transport. The access that I have to Melbourne is fantastic. Yeah. I mean, in the peak hour, the trains leave where I live every 20 minutes for the town. So it's and then during the non-peak hour, it's still every 40 minutes. So it's very easy to get around. And once you are there, well, I can tell you now, I haven't taken my car to the city. I don't even think it knows where the city is, because you would never drive to the city. You just get public transport. But one of the other things that I think people often, and it is right to talk up Melbourne's, I guess that sort of arts festival, multicultural food side, that all of that is absolutely true and great. But I think one of the other things about Melbourne, it'd be great to get both of your opinions, is it's a really safe city. I mean, it's a really safe place to get around. People are very helpful. I like all cities, big cities, you're going come across the odd element, or if you're in the wrong spot at the wrong time, you might see things that you'd rather not. But largely moving around Melbourne, I don't know if I've ever been in a city, unless you're in a much smaller sort of regional sort of town or whatever, but it's a very safe place to go. You can go to, say, our AFL footy and turn up with 70,000 people there and feel completely safe. And there's no, it's a very rare occurrence to have an experience in Melbourne where you come home and think, oh, that was a bit uncomfortable. Ian, would you find that? Did you find that when you came here?
Yeah, it's a very tolerant city. I think it's a very progressive city in its outlook, in terms of it's certainly the festivals reflect that, the day-to-day lifestyle reflects that. I think one of the big bonuses for me living in Melbourne is how comprehensive the bicycle network is. The traffic-free bicycle lanes. I live 5k from the city. It takes me 15 minutes to ride into the city for work, completely traffic-free. So I think I have to cross 6 roads. That's it. In 5 kilometers, which is improving all the time, and they're building and improving those cycle lanes. So often people do say, do I need to buy a car when I arrive? I lived in Melbourne when I came from the UK. the only reason I bought a car was for the weekly shop. I think it was the most expensive carrying of bags. I should have just got somebody to carry them for me, maybe, or got a donkey. But it was, yeah, certainly not a necessity to get a car. It certainly can broaden your horizons and certainly make those trips out a little bit more reasonable. But certainly you can, and also maybe you come over with a friend as well. You might car share, or there's certainly lots of schemes as well, flexi car schemes, where you can hire cars for the day as well, which I think would be particularly useful had they existed when I came to Australia 12 years ago. But Bex, to finish off, what can people do to get in touch and if they want to find out some more information about teaching in Melbourne?
Yeah, certainly. So you can send us an email or hop onto our website and register your CV on there. What's the best contact, Ian, for Kiwis? Do we have a specific?
I don't know. Yes, call 1-800-KIWI. Yeah, I don't know. I think it would just be log onto the website, submit your CV, and yeah, somebody will be in touch. I think that would be it.
Yeah.
Well, we'll wrap it up, Ian, will we? Do you want me to say goodbye? And you're going to edit it?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I could just say,
yes.
Look, give it, if you are in, if you're at all interested, give it a go. My little dog here, he loves Melbourne. He hasn't been very often, but he loves Melbourne. But yeah, give it a go. It is a really great city. It's a friendly city. I will say this right from the outset. It's not as pretty. It's not as spectacular as Sydney, no doubt about that. And the weather's not as good as Brisbane, but we've certainly got a good sense of humour in Melbourne. And that's because you can come here one day in the morning or lunchtime, it can be 35, and by dinner time, it might be 16. So that always promotes a good sense of humour, I think. You can never take it for granted.
Like Dunedin.
Yeah, right.
A sense of resilience and a sense of humor is what you can expect. And yeah, certainly it's not as beautiful as Sydney, but the people are more beautiful, surely. And also we have, as Bex alluded to, with the foodie elements, we have more hatted restaurants than Sydney by quite a way. So if you're into food, this is the place to be. But thanks very much for tuning in, and hopefully that helps. Hopefully your future adventure. We will certainly help you every step of the way that we can. Any questions, just get in touch. But thanks so much for listening. Thanks, Bex. Thanks, Billy.
Pleasure. Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
See you.